Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. Thank you for being here still on the before last session of Seaweed Around the Clock. We will be talking about social planning around seaweed and how it can help local communities. And to really kickstart this, before we enter with our panel of tremendous people, we will start with Alexandra Cousteau, president and founder of Ocean 2050. So Alexandra, in 10 minutes, I know you're on the clock, so in 10 minutes, can you explain a bit about what your mission and your vision is with Ocean 2050 and how you aim to use seaweed as a vector of growth for coastal communities?
Absolutely, Antoine. Hi, everyone. It's nice to join you again. And I just wanted to start with a story. Because as I was thinking about this section of the event and the impact that seaweed can have for local communities, me when I was working in Central America. And I spent a lot of time with local communities that were remote from Panama City. You know, they were 8 hours away by 4x4 and by little motorboats, and they, lived without electricity, without running water, and where the nearest medical clinic was hours away. And they lived from the ocean. The ocean was everything for them, and they had, I think, Antoine, if you mute yourself, there'll be less background noise.
Sorry.
Yeah. No worries, no worries. So they lived from the ocean and until recently had been able to fish near shore. You know, they could go out for a day and come back with their holds full of fish in their little fishing boats. But because of industrial fishing that had wiped out the resources along their coastline, they found that they couldn't go out and fish anymore. And so they started selling their subsidized gasoline to the drug runners that were moving drugs from Colombia, Eastern Tropical Pacific, to the United States. And we worked trying to help them find local alternative livelihoods, but it was hard. And I've seen that story of the impact of overfishing and mismanagement of ocean resources over and over and over again. And it's really a sad story because fishing and living near the ocean is a story as old as itself. And so when I think about this quote by my grandfather that you may know, which basically says that it's time for us to move from hunting the ocean to farming the ocean, it very much is a response to seeing what many have seen with overfishing and its impact on coastal communities, and of how these coastal communities are struggling to find alternatives. And when I learned about seaweed, and the more I learn about seaweed, I realized that this may be what my grandfather was talking about. This idea that we can live from the ocean and be close to the ocean and love the ocean without loving it to death. We can actually have a livelihood that supports a just transition, that supports Indigenous communities and women, and allows them to make a living through the blue economy in a way that's regenerative and not exploitative. And so when we, right now at Oceans 2050, we are, one of the things that we're doing is a study to understand the sequestration of carbon under seaweed farms. And that's really exciting, of course. It'll allow us to do a voluntary carbon protocol and start to compensate farmers for sequestering carbon. But we're also doing an eDNA study to look at biodiversity and how farms aggregate biodiversity because they basically. And finally, we are starting a study on the social impact of seaweed farming. And that to me is one of the most interesting and important ones because of the 24 farms that are part of our study that located on 5 different continents, and bring together over 20,000 farmers in places like Indonesia and Madagascar and Chile and Alaska and Maine and Norway and France. 60% of them are women, and 60% is a lot, you know, and these women are often seaweed farmers because they are head of household, or they're a single mother, or they bring in extra income because their husbands, who are fishermen, especially in places like the Philippines, aren't making any money anymore from fishing because of overfishing. So sometimes their husbands join them in seaweed farming. And these are stories that are in direct contrast to the communities that I spent time with, where their livelihoods had been wiped out and they were spending their time in their bars instead of in their boats. And these are stories of growth and of building and of regeneration and of hope and and of adjustment. There is a role for everyone, for the indigenous communities, for women, for everyone who is in a coastal community and has and the ability to grow seaweed. In one of our partners, Atlantic Sea Farms, whose CEO is a woman, Brianna Warner, an extraordinary woman, and she works with lobster farmers, lobster fishermen, who are in the off season seaweed farmers. And as the outlook for Maine changes and lobsters start leaving Maine because of climate change and the warming waters, this will probably become their main source of livelihood. And so when we talk about seaweed, I think it's really important that we don't just talk about it as a product, as an industrial feedstock, that we see it as the cornerstone of a regenerative blue economy that can help us with a just transition and could be the foundation of how we rebuild marine biodiversity and restore abundance to our oceans. So the more I learn about seaweed and all that it can do for us, the more excited I become. And that's one of the reasons that I was so happy that you're doing seaweed around the clock and that I could be part of helping to talk about this and drive this conversation forward. So thank you. I can't stay with you for the panel discussion, but I was glad to be able to join you for a moment.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. It's almost like a bedtime story. What you were saying, it's really inspirational, and I agree 100% with the fact that we think a lot about the industry, we think about all those people, but in the end, it's the communities that are actually working the seaweed that begin everything, and they're the beginning of the entire story. So managing that locally is essential for the rest to work out. So thank you very much for this inspiring story. I wish you a good rest of the evening, I guess. Thank you so much for being here all day. And we'll continue the discussion with the three panelists.
Sounds good. Have a good panel. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Okay, now let's get to business. So before we dive directly into the core of the subject, I'd like each of you to do a little short presentation. So I'll start with the ladies. Sorry, Jorge. Paulina, do you want to start?
Yes, well, I am Paulina Zanela, originally from Mexico City, currently working on a project with the integral management of seaweed with sargassum seaweed, so wild seaweed. And I guess that's a good introduction.
Kim, you want to go?
Yeah, so my name's Kimberly Buffitt. I am the president of Lorna Shore Bioproducts Cooperative, Solidarity Cooperative, and I also owner in my own business, Shore Grow, which is harvests algae. So we work predominantly in Ascophyllum, fucus, and the laminaria kelps. So that's us in a little snapshot.
And Jorge, you want to go? You have to unmute.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jorge Vega Matos. I am part of C-Combinator, And like Paulina, we are focusing on sargassum seaweed and the Atlantic sargassum bloom that has been affecting the Caribbean for the last 10 years, turning this sargassum that's been accumulating and damaging ecosystems into valuable products and derivatives in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Jorge. So I guess we'll start directly with our first main topic, is to really dive and understand exactly how you guys work with the communities you're in. As we mentioned a bit before, today consumers and even companies are actually looking for more locally sourced products closer to where they are, and are really taking care of this entire aspect of a circular system. And of course, at the heart of this circular system is the communities working with the seaweed. So I'd like to go from each side and explain a bit how you developed your business model for the communities, and say exactly, how is it built? What are the main? How do you interact with them? So if it's okay, I'd like to start with the sargassum side and then finish with you, Kim. So this time, Jorge, if you want to start, you want to explain?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this great day of events. You must be very, very tired, and we're thankful for that. So for us, it's very interesting because in the Caribbean, there hasn't been a traditional community-led approach to harvesting seaweed or even farming seaweed. It has traditionally been seen as a weed, as a pest, as something that's actually clogging up the beaches and affecting tourism, affecting the livelihood of fishermen and fisherwomen. Um, so our impact is primarily being in some of these communities that, by the way, are also being highly affected by climate volatility in the Caribbean, and working with different types of communities, fishermen's associations, hotels, and really just like local governments in trying to see what is the best way to pick up this sargassum. That's obviously the first type of impact. And second, generally, something that we're very focusing on is, like you mentioned, the circularity aspect of it. We are a public benefit corporation, and we're very in both of the places that we're operating in, Puerto Rico and Mexico's Quintana Roo. We are really focusing what we are creating out of sargassum seaweed and being able to drop it in the local economy. We're starting with agriculture, but we're also looking into other areas of manufacturing where we're going to be creating materials like bioleathers, no-woven textiles, emulsifiers for cosmetics or biomedical uses. And in both of these places, those are industries that have been greatly affected in the last 20 to 30 years, but the infrastructure is there. So there's a chance of working with local governments in reactivating some of these plants and some of these industries, this time with local inputs.
It's very interesting, and yeah, as you said, sargassum is a very tricky one because it's kind of a double-edged sword. There's the negative side that everyone sees, and it's very hard to communicate on saying that there is a potential with this. And on the other side, I mean, what you guys are doing, whether it's C-Combinator or Thalasso, trying to drive actually innovation using the sargassum and proving that it can actually be used in a very smart way, not only benefiting science and developing products, but also the communities. So that said, I'll let Paulina as well tell her story about the sargassum as well.
So I think with the sargassum invasion to the Caribbean is very interesting. Sargassum, if you talk to local people in Mexico, Barbados, Antigua, they know sargassum. It's been there for several years, generations probably, but never like this. Never like these massive influxes that are damaging the ecosystem and the livelihood and the economy of these coastal communities. So indeed, it's been the perception, of course, is that it's just garbage coming from the ocean, and that's it, and that it's damaging like in all levels. So we do have a very like hard work to do when it comes to the cultural appropriation of this species. The sargassum is, at the beginning they thought it was like something rare, but now they know it's here to stay. So as it happens with several resources, like for example, there's this story about the king crab in Norway. It was a plague and it was eating everything, but they managed to actually turn the problem around, right? And now they sell it like a high-end product. So it's something. It's just change the mindset of the people and make them understand this is a natural resource, and if it's well managed, it will benefit the community. And I think that is happening slowly. Of course, we need more support from governments. As long as they continue communicating this biomass as garbage coming from the ocean and affecting the land, it will be very difficult for them to change. But the reality is that we do have to work on that, the cultural appropriation. And at the same time, by creating jobs in Barbados, for example, they have 75 people hired to clean the beach. So for a small island, is a big amount of people having jobs. So this is unfortunately, we need to fast track this. This would have been different if it was like from generation and increasing amount of seaweed coming, then somebody discovering it can be used and so on. But at this point, we need to fast track everything. So yeah, we need to create this probably cooperatives, so people own it. It's gonna be like critical for us to make people own this, so we can make things happen faster.
I agree, and I think it's the perfect transition towards Kim, because you're mentioning cooperatives, and so Kim is doing that exact model. So Kim, can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing? And I think it's important to have someone from Canada, because people think remoteness is only in Africa, Central America, and I think it's important for them to realize that even in some developed countries, isolation can be a huge challenge.
Yeah, for us, like I said, we're in a very remote part of Canada, so it's 14 coastal villages that are connected by road. So they have those challenges. So they're still traveling, for instance, from village to village. In the summertime, it's by boat, and for us, of course, we're northern. So in wintertime, it's by snowmobiles. So there is no connections between these villages. So even trying to set up like your processing and all of the complications that come with that when you're trying to move a product like algae is complicated, because it's a lot of water, a lot of weight to transport. So for us, our model is exactly kind of what Paulina had said, is we wanted to have an ownership in the communities and give back. And we truthfully think the market is going that way as well. I think the consumers want to buy into brands that are going through like all those aspects of it, so that the harvester is going to get some kickback really from an end product, and there's traceability too right back from their products that they're buying, that this product is sustainable, it's harvested in a way that respects their values. For us, like our co-op is a multi-stakeholder co-op, so it has all different aspects. So it has their harvester members, it has our worker members that do the actual processing. Then it also has business members, which could be a transport company that transports the product back and forth. And then it has support members. So these could be foundations or even nonprofit organizations that kind of believe in what we're doing and kind of the objectives behind it. Because it's not easy work, like Paulina said, you're changing a culture. For us, it's very, very similar. And much like you referred to, George referred to with the crab, it's not something they traditionally did. They harvest it for their gardens, and they were using it for agricultural purposes. They also used it for animal feed, but they weren't using it, let's say, like we're using it in cosmetics and nutraceuticals and different things like that. So it's kind of outside of their scope of what they did. What we also found, we had to put a lot of effort in developing curriculum for training. There's not a lot of training tools for like sustainably harvesting and how to get your permits and how to do all of the steps and processes that are quite complex. So we spent a lot of time developing like harvester's guides and and getting the Ministry of Education in Quebec to recognize the certification, and that someone that took the course would have a proper paper when they finished that was accredited by ministry. So I think like we're kind of all pioneers in this aspect, because I think it's a global issue, is trying to get all of those pieces of a very big puzzle kind of sorted out.
And as you mentioned, and this is something I really wanted to talk about, is how do you educate the people? And when I'm saying people is, of course, so there's a lot local population that sometimes is not entirely aware of the benefits seaweed can have. Of course, they understand the basics, but they don't really see the value beyond that. And as well, something I also wanted to mention in the education is how do you use seaweed to hold on to the local potential? Because especially in a lot of these regions, whether it's in the Caribbean islands or even in Canada, sometimes in these remote areas, there's kind of like a brain drain, we can say. People go to the bigger cities because that's where there's more interesting jobs with bigger companies. And how do all three of you tackle that issue in saying, stay home, there's seaweed here, and the potential of seaweed goes beyond what you can even imagine? So I'll let anyone start. Kim, if you want, or Paulina, or Jorge.
Us, we worked with, we started with like what I would call our post-secondary education, which is universities. So we do two things at the university level with students that are either from the territory or even feel passionate about get involved in our territory or want to. So I'm not sure if it's the same everywhere, but in Canada, you have to do what they call a Keystone project when you're graduating from with your bachelor's degree. So we've incorporated into various universities throughout Canada. So the University of Ottawa, the University of Quebec in Trois-Rivières, and Memorial University, that they would do their Keystone projects on the Lower Shore. So for instance, we had a project that was done on alginates from algae by a chemical engineering team from the University of Ottawa. And then the second area that we worked on, and that was probably the most difficult because it was very difficult to find a university that was willing to do it. We created a remote master's program for local youth. So they had their bachelor's degree, and then to do applied research in the territory, and at the end publish the literature on whatever topic they were studying. So we did the first round kind of our master's program was all one girl. She was doing her environmental science degree all around algae sustainability, the harvesting and extraction process for cosmetics. So it's that kind of engagement, I think, will get them back because they see their career potential. Because I think before, what we call brain drain in the regions was that those kind of jobs were only in cities. And so that kind of possibility of them coming back and having a career and at the salary scale that they would get paid if they lived in an urban area. But I think the challenge and what I speak about a lot here is that universities have to step out of their comfort zone, which is usually their building, and to do distance learning. And I truthfully think COVID actually helped us with that because they had to, and they escalated kind of their timelines. But I do think that is critical, especially on the pharma and cosmetic and nutraceutical side, that gets more developed.
Give enough credit to COVID sometimes about the benefits it has done on such effects, especially on remote working, remote studying, and stuff like that. Paulina, you want to go ahead?
Yes. So a little bit with the case with sargassum and Caribbean islands in Mexico and so on. So the thing is, there's a lot of people who stays home because they have no option, like getting out of the island when you are a low-income person, or getting out of in Mexico of Quintana Roo is not a possibility. But they are indeed losing their jobs because most of these people. This is very interesting because most of the people. And most of the Caribbean island and region, their main source of income is the tourism. So of course the COVID came, the sargassum came before, so they start losing their jobs because there's nothing else to do but tourism. So sargassum in Mexico, like there are so many projects, people doing shoes with sargassum, construction materials, and let's not even talk about the alginate fucoidan or the important ingredients for the industry, but just like how do I like turn this biomass that is for free, that it's ugly, took my job away, how do I turn it into an opportunity? So they started with these construction blogs, some people making some notebooks and so on. So I think the hard part is not the integration of the community. The challenge is much more like on educating the governments and educating the investors to see that possibility in this side of the world. And probably I've been watching some of these panels, and I see it's not only on this side of the world, but I mean, like blue economy is like starting to wake up, and the blue economy investors are starting to wake up, but it's still complicated. And yeah, of course, the education of the government, like telling them this is a source of jobs, this is a source of income. You can like stop depending solely on tourism and shift a little bit into this blue economy. So yes, there's a lot of work to do with the investors and the government, so then people continue being inspired and supported and get the resources that they need to take this chance.
And I think we're going to jump into that subject with Jorge as well. Jorge, I mean, you have two sides. You have Mexico, and then you have Puerto Rico, which is more or less the U.S. Do you see any differences in how you manage, how you work with the local communities, and how you actually promote your project?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think the link between this question and the previous one is the Caribbean is a very interesting region historically, and they've always been kind of like at the margins of a lot of things because of colonialism, because of the fact that there's a lot of different countries within this region, meaning that there's no really a lot of established strong economic links or supply chains between them. The whole region in different ways has been at the tail end of a lot of these supply chains, meaning that they're dependent on them. And so, you know, it ties into the question of like, what is the impact in terms of jobs and in terms of knowledge, is that it's like Paulina said, it's creating new opportunities outside of things like tourism. Specifically for Mexico and Puerto Rico, we are very excited, and I you know, it bears repeating that we're not really growing sargassum. It's pelagic, so we're really just harvesting. If anything, we're kind of ranching it, and what that means is that obviously we're creating jobs, you know, very much like just picking up the biomass and processing it. We're going to be doing a lot of our processing in Mexico. And then in Puerto Rico, we're going to be sort of tapping into creating a biorefinery, which is probably going to be the largest and the first marine biomass refinery, if not in the Caribbean, in the whole Western hemisphere for this type of tropical seaweed. And so we're doing that, you know, between the two spaces because of practical reasons. A lot of the sargassum ends up in Quintana Roo anyway. So there's an actual need to pick it up there. But for example, that's why we're also setting up our agricultural R&D facility in Mexico, because Mexico is a net exporter, one of the top exporters of agricultural food products in the world. It's also, again, at the forefront of dealing with climate volatility, from flooding in the south to overnight freezes in the north. And so we see a lot of opportunity there. We've recently entered an agreement with the University of Chapingo, which is one of the top agricultural universities in the Americas, for them to be our validating partner in some of these agricultural products on sargassum. In Puerto Rico, likewise, we're also partnering with universities. We're partnering with local institutions that are slowly waking up to the fact that this is a completely new economy. And it's not just in terms of generating jobs, it's obviously all the other jobs and all the other research that has to be done. Because if we're really doing a lot of advanced manufacturing in these places, well, the other, the other infrastructure that we might need, the educated labor force, it really impacts a lot of other spaces in these islands. So the multiplying effect of setting up in some of these places is really great. And because of Sargassum being previously unexplored, completely new.
It's true. I mean, especially, I mean, I think it's going to be a domino effect, especially in those kind of areas, is the more you talk about it, the more links you make, the more you're going to break the barriers, and the easier it's going to be to develop a very interesting business model, integrating all the various effects, all the different stakeholders that are involved. And this is actually what I wanted to jump into now, because I know that you all have some very unique relationships with, whether it's the industry, the government, the universities, and others. So I'd like to have your point of view of exactly how, as a local community, do you interact with these people? If we can start with Kim, because I know that you're very linked with federal and provincial governments. You have strong partnerships as well with some big industry. So how do you manage actually all these interactions and keep a hold of everything locally?
Yeah, it's a process. What I found is also for us, I think, was the biggest learning curve was like the quality management and accreditation required by the larger companies. Like, say, if you're dealing with an Estee Lauder, their audit processes of your facilities and developing all of that with the community, because our communities traditionally were very involved in the food industry. So when you move them from what they're used to doing, which was always processing like fish and different things like that, to a cosmetic and nutraceutical industry, obviously you're really upping all of the change in terms of how they're going to do stuff. They're reporting, and then you have to set them up for all the training for that. So I think that was probably one of the biggest learning curves for our community was the quality side of the processing. In terms of government, I think the struggle for us again is being part of we're a small region, and we're, like I said, an isolated region, was the government officials having the capacity to even analyze our file for permits and stuff. So they had to go then to a city center, let's say like Montreal, to get expertise, because they didn't have it. We never ever had like a cosmetic facility in our territory ever before. So like just the capacity at a government level to even analyze a file is not because they didn't want the project to move forward. It was having the staff that could look at it and understand it. So I think all of those, like Antoine said, was a lot of juggling, and we're still juggling, I'll say, today, and trying to, because you have to be in all of the places. And normally, like, I think if you go into a large urban center and you're setting up, that capacity's there. And so, that's a difficult part. So, not only is it for our own local people, but even the government side of who's managing, whether it's a local municipality, then you got your provincial permitting bodies, and you got your federal permitting bodies. So it's all of that is not easy. and it's all of the time, I think, is the biggest thing, because government does not move quick. They're beast in itself. And what we've also seen is the communication between different departments is not easy, and getting them around a table to have discussions so that you have everybody there. Once we were able to do that, like where you could have environment with, the municipal affairs and all of those at one setting, it got a lot easier, because you might be dealing with 6 or 7 permitting bodies that all have to communicate together, and one is like a domino effect for another. So I think that's probably was I think when we got our win was when we got them all around the table at the same time, talking to each other and understanding the project at the same level and hearing each other ask questions and to get clarity, because we were talking to them individually first. And by putting them at one spot, it seemed like we moved faster.
It's once again about, I wouldn't say raising awareness for even for governments or whatever, but it's making them understand the bigger picture, because sometimes they're just working in their own little silo. They have their own tasks, and they don't understand that if they just look at the other business unit just beside them, like, oh, wait, there's a link we can do, and we can actually find a way to help them more efficiently. So, and I saw Paulina and Jorge just nod all the time. So
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of a deja vu for you guys as well in the Caribbean, no?
Right. I think it's and this goes back to kind of like the differences between Puerto Rico and Mexico, what really about places that have been already affected by sargassum. In Mexico, for example, the Mexican Navy has had to come in to deal with this problem because it's so big, right? And that's where you understand that there's already procedures for companies to be able to operate with a fair degree of independence, still obviously following all the rules and protocols to minimize environmental impact, and do that. And for example, that's also one of the reasons why we're partnering with Chapingo University, because we know that by illustrating that we can make something out of this sargassum that impacts the local economy and local society, then there's going to be a higher awareness of that. In Puerto Rico, though, it's also interesting because while it has been affected by sargassum, it hasn't been as affected as Mexico. The economy is a little bit more diversified. But then there's also the question of jurisdiction between local Puerto Rico and the US. And that's where we have to say, right? I mean, Puerto Rico has been battered by a lot of hurricanes recently, including Hurricane Maria. There's also a strong culture of environmental protection, especially around the beaches, because there's been a lot of developments that have affected very valuable ecosystems. So rightfully so, local authorities and local scientists and biologists are very protective of them. And in Puerto Rico, we've been working with them to train our workforce and to create procedures that don't exist because the government hasn't created them yet in order to minimize our environmental impact. That said, looking at the future of sargassum as kind of like this inter-jurisdictional seaweed, because it really does move through international waters and different types of coast, that's where we see a lot of a real need to clarify that sooner rather than possible than later. In the case of the United States, for example, sadly, there hasn't been a lot of research around the Atlantic sargassum belt. For all intents and purposes, they see it as part of the Atlantic Sargasso Sea, which is obviously a very important ecosystem. But what that creates is a condition where anything about sargassum, don't touch it. You cannot touch it. You cannot do anything with it. And that really inhibits what we can be doing with that. So there is a need for more science, and there is a need for very specific regulation to start thinking of, we're going to be seeing a lot of sargassum blooms in the Caribbean. That is the new normal. And actually around the world, there's going to be a lot of more macroalgae blooms. How do we deal with that, knowing that some of these blooms are going to be so massive that they're going to be overlapping between jurisdictions, international waters, etc. We need a new kind of legal framework for that.
And I think it's one of the biggest issues we've been talking about today is building that legal framework to allow seaweed to be developed properly and help the smaller companies to get their licenses, to extend their projects, to get the necessary funding, et cetera, et cetera. So Paulina, tell us about your experience with the Mexican Navy as well, because you talked about it at the beginning, and of course, other interactions that you had.
Yeah, so it's been, first I would like to say I used to work for federal government in Mexico, and before that for the Congress. So I have, that for me has been very beneficial because I kind of know how it works, and I kind of know that they, what they like to hear. And sometimes they just want to be in the picture, they just leave you all the work. So you come back, you invite them to the opening event, and then they are happy that somebody's doing the job and they say they would be part of it. But every government is very different. So you have to be facing a cultural stuff when you're working with governments. And my experience, well, in Mexico, there's been it's been very confusing. There's been and probably in the whole Caribbean, there's been a lack of leadership when it comes to how to manage a regional threat. So sometimes the French islands, they tried to be the leaders. Then the Dutch people put some money to make some pilots. Then Mexico said, well, I'm the big brother, so I should take care of it. So then they're all pulling in all directions rather than helping each other. Like, okay, I've used this works. And I've seen it. Like, I went to Barbados and they bought a harvesting vessel that has been proven in Mexico few years before, and it tilt. Some people got hurt, and Barbados didn't know that. They still bought it, and it didn't work for Barbados either, because this is for rivers, this is for lakes. So again, this lack of communication, as same like the lack of regulation. It's lack of leadership. Like somebody, like some international somebody should like raise their hands and say, okay, so this is the whole picture, this is the future, this is what can be done, this, like somebody should put some guidelines there. But everybody's like doing as best as they can. Yeah. And also like so I worked a little bit with some senators in Mexico, and they say, well, the sargassum is not a legal problem. The sargassum is just a natural resource. So if this is a resource that you want to fish, go to the fisheries, get a permit. And then if you want to process it and you want to make like a product for humans, then you have to go to the health ministry and get your approval, right? And this is quite normal. This would be what happens with any industry. But since it is very new, we do have to work on that. But on the other side, when I work with Barbados, they have a blue economy minister. So they have a completely different way of thinking. They know they should create sustainable projects for the sake of their own islands, because they are isolated, right? So it's very different, it's challenging, but I do think in the case of sargassum or seaweed in general, we need to like come all together, assign somebody the leadership so we can regulate the things that are at least very logical.
I think it's easy to start saying, the government is not there, and I think sometimes I'm the first one to say that, but I think that especially last year we really saw the emergence of plenty of new initiatives and a shift in the mindset of certain governments and certain institutions to go towards seaweed and start exploring the new opportunities. As you said, there's blue economy ministers. Some people did some blue economy roadmaps. Some people are looking at synergies between the blue economy and seaweed and other industries as well. So all these are kind of moving towards a more interesting new opportunities, and the latest one that we actually have is around climate change, and this is something I actually wanted to see with all of you. Is, do you think with all the companies today that are spending more and more on CSR because they're polluting, because they want to contribute to social development, do you think there's an opportunity for coastal communities in harnessing the ecosystem benefits and the social benefits of seaweed to actually make it an even more viable business model? Kim, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll add on to what Paulina said too, because we looked and we have already started kind of the structure of a company is very much in its infancy stage, is the internet, which has seats from different countries, because I do think there is a lack of sharing, not only amongst government, but companies. And like you said, just that, whether sharing this piece of technology didn't work or this piece of equipment didn't work. And what we're seeing is we're redoing each other's mistakes, where we could go much faster if we had a mechanism where we could share research and different parts of IP and what to use and what not to use and what works where. Because I think it's one of the biggest battles is we're taking longer because we're not sharing across territories and regions. But I also agree, I think there's a lot of research started on all of the carbon capture, and I think carbon bonds are growing, and I think COVID kind of slowed it down a bit, but I do think it's going to be a big push where you're going to see the implementation of carbon bonds and for companies and being carbon neutral for consumers, that your company is a carbon neutral company. I think it's going to be a big factor in the future. And I do think that algae's technologies have a big role in sustainability and packaging and different things like that for the future. So I do think it is. I think we have work to do, I guess, as businesses across the globe to get some consensus on how we actually measure it, what tools we're going to use, and consensus again at a government level, because there's the corporation level and then there's the government level that will be actually issuing the bonds. So it's a complicated file, but I think I think algae is probably one of the most promising industries in my point of view to be at the forefront of that. And I think that's really exciting. But I really think that what we started with the International Blue Co-op and things like that has a big role to play with linking businesses, because I don't think that's really necessarily happening right now.
You're absolutely right, and I think all these opportunities of linking people is vital, especially right now. As you said, there's a lack of knowledge. We don't know exactly who the different actors are. And when you have some, you really want to develop this strong relationship with. And this, I just wanted to bounce on this as well with you, Kim, is that I know that you work with two big American companies, and I know that they're investing a lot in your community. And can you just elaborate a bit more on this?
So, like I said, I think it's that give back of the social, like with the companies that we've been working with. Integrity is a big one. They're ingredient supplier in the U.S. and adopting those values. So they invest in scholarships for the youth in the high schools, to donating to community-based programs, whether it's like building could be a church or anything, and that they're also there with the education and the need that jobs need to stay in these rural and remote communities. In our context, is a lot of times jobs end up being centralized in one place, and the rural regions where truthfully a lot of the blue economy exists are dying. And that's a very sad state. We're not the only ones. This is common across the world. You're seeing population decline, and then they're going to the major cities. So I think to have a community that values the sense of place, I call it, that this is where the true blue economy is in these regions, and that they're going to invest to process and to produce product that comes from that place. And I do think the consumer is going that way too. But I think Integrity, the company we work with, really lives up to its name. It's having integrity in what you do, and that's not just in what you're selling, but that you're staying true to social purpose too, that the jobs and all of the sustainability is built into your structure.
Absolutely, and I think it's really great. It's quite uncommon today for companies to invest so much in communities, especially for the seaweed, so it's very positive to see that point of view. And Paulina, to talk about the infrastructure, investing within the communities, I know that you're working on a very interesting project in Barbados to actually help build the local communities, and it also has a social impact, but also environmental. Do you want to say a bit more on that?
Sure. So I think I would like to start repeating what Pierre said when we early connected. I am a seaweed addict, yes. So I do believe the seaweed, the future of humankind depends on the ocean at this point. And I do believe the seaweed will be the savior. And I've seen it with the research, like and you know, all of these companies developing medicine, so it has like medicinal properties. It also has nutrition. We can even, like, okay, if people don't want to go plant-based, and when I say plant-based, I mean ocean plant-based, then you can feed the kettle with seaweeds, and then you reduce the methane emissions, and then the seaweed is also sequestrating carbon. So seaweed is the hero of the world that's been hiding, and we finally go back to where we all humans came out from the ocean. So we're going back to the basic, the very basic, and that's where the answer of many of the human problems is. And I do believe seaweeds are the hero. So as long as we can integrate the consumption of seaweed in all ways, like compost, biofertilizer, supplement, food, and so on, bioplastic, we will be impacting immediately, socially, economically, and culturally. So with Barbados is doing a little bit of this. So we're working on a microbiorefinery project. And the idea is giving the opportunity to all these affected islands to refine their own sargassum, their own biomass. And naturally, they are already curious about processing other resources, like they have red seaweed, so they are asking already, okay, so we can also do something with red seaweeds. So it's very exciting for them to see that there's actually a big opportunity to do this. And the government is very open, and they're very supportive in Barbados. They're offering piece of land, they're contacting us with all financial institutions and so on. So yeah, I think seaweed, it's some people in the Caribbean see it as a curse, but I think it was just a notch, like, people, you're doing it wrong, come back to the ocean, like, here's the answer. So I think that's what's happening here.
Absolutely, return back to the ancient times, reusing, relearning everything that we learned before. You know, it's a basic concept in philosophy, but I guess for seaweed it works as well. And Jorge, to come back on C-Combinator, I know you guys have plenty of applications on at the moment, but one that I think is very interesting, especially from an environmental point of view, is using the sargassum for biofertilizers to maintain water and really start helping the soil to increase the yields in areas with a lot of droughts. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I think that also, to connect it to the previous question, there's coastal economies and islands have always been at the forefront of trying to make the most with very few resources, because, again, especially in the tropics, they've been facing a lot of the first effects of what we're probably going to be seeing in the rest of the planet over the next 100 to 200 years. And so coasts are going to be very important. We already know that they're going to be important, for example, for offshore wind energy generation. So we do see a lot of infrastructure focused on coast that local communities are going to be very important in managing for many different reasons. But yeah, for agriculture, it's interesting because what we're doing is, it can be a fertilizer, but essentially what we're also doing is a biostimulant. Seaweed obviously has a lot of natural phytohormones. These are basically molecules that signal to other plants to grow as resilient and as fast as the seaweeds do. And sargassum, being a pelagic species, grows in very tough situations. It just needs sun. It's sucking up all the nutrients from around it, and so with that extract, we're able to sort of signal to other plants on land to do the same things. What's interesting, though, is that this biostimulant also helps regenerate the soil. In a way, it also helps bring back soil that has been over nutrified, that has been degraded due through tilling for number of years. Also, a lot of fertilizers out there are essentially inorganic fertilizers made from petroleum. In fact, this is a legacy of the Green Revolution, which is what has allowed us to feed a lot of people over the last century, but that now we see that the reason why it worked so fast and so well is because it was made with derivatives that now we know have degraded our soils, and there's a new normal. So we're very excited for the biostimulant to be able to regenerate the soils. It helps the plants be with their nutrient uptake, which means that you need less nutrients overall, less fertilizers. And it also signals to the plant to be able to resist different types of stress, from heat stress to sun stress, and bounce back from all the volatility that we know we're going to be seeing in agriculture in the tropics. On top of that, I think that it's important to also note that a lot of products that are useful for regenerating agriculture are not just biostimulants, things like biochar. And this is, for example, one of the products that you can do from different types of seaweed biomass. That's something that's very easy to do, or fairly simple to do. Something that has a lot of uses for regenerating soils, helping soils keep a lot more of the water that they have in them. And this is so easy that a lot of communities that are working with seaweed are going to be able to do around the world. So we already see that different types of seaweed, different types of species lend themselves to very, very useful, simple solutions and derivatives that have a massive impact in regenerating the soils and regenerating the oceans as well.
Pressure on seaweed because they have to save the oceans, but now they have to save land. So it's really the untrue hero that's really going to have a lot of issues. I just looked at the time. We could keep talking for hours, of course. There's so much to say, but I guess we're going to have to do our closing statements. What I'd like for you to capture in this last statement is, what would be your message? Because here we have a lot of industry, we have some government officials, we have some investors. What would be your key message as leaders of these coastal communities to them? Whoever feels the most inspired can begin.
We're not essentially we're not a community, for example, in the same way that Kim would do, but we are working with a lot of local communities in the region, and we're very excited about that. As a closing statement, I mean, we are a public benefit corporation and we're raising funds in different ways, so definitely reach out to us in case that you're interested. We're also starting a crowdfunding option very soon, so not only accredited investors can invest in us. There's for very, very little money, we're also accepting people to buy into our company as a regular investor, because we do believe that everybody should have a stake in investing in this very future-oriented infrastructure now. So that would be the first invitation. And the second one, it's an exhortation, and I think this is something that both Kim and Paulina have said, is that there needs to be a lot of new infrastructure, legal infrastructure, research that facilitates and incentivizes not just large companies or large organizations to be able to access and process seaweed. There's a lot of uses, and it does have a lot of uses that are going to be pertinent for the future of humanity, from being able to sequester carbon to creating alternatives to fossil fuel-based products like plastics or vinyls, etc. And so we're very excited about that. And we know that there has to be a new type of infrastructure, both legal and economic, to be able to support all these emerging industries in a way that traditional agriculture hasn't been able to do. So we just have to break the models for the near future.
I agree 100% on that. Paulina, do you want to say a few words?
Sure. Well, my message for the industry, for fellow seaweed people, share your knowledge so we can make this path shorter, as Kim said, as we've experienced, and eat seaweed. For governments, help us regulate. Let's do this together and eat seaweed. And for people in general, eat seaweed. Investors, we're also looking for investors, always local or international. So of course, come reach out. Thalasso Ocean is the name of the company. I didn't say it at the beginning, but yes, in general, just integrate seaweed in your daily life, or notice that it's there all the time and promote it so everybody is aware of it.
Super. Thanks, Paulina. Kim?
I I guess kind of a ripple of what they had said. I think for the government partners that are on today is really embracing different models, because you're going to be different people at different levels. Like at a harvester level, you're going to have people with very low incomes. So like looking at different models for investment that will allow people to, like, say, have a boat and have those things, to the processing and infrastructure, which is going to be more, you're going to see the large scale investors there, but it can't be a one cookie cutter model. And you have to understand some of the clientele that they are going to be dealing with at banks and different things are extremely low income families. And so to have that space that someone with a low income could make a change. And I would say that at the investor level too. And I think for consumers, that is important to them now, more so than ever, and social media and different things has changed that. The other, I guess, for me, with especially my passion, and Pierre will tell you it hasn't been easy, is the importance of the collaboration at the International Blue Co-op, and trying to get a body that we can share at, because I think we do have a structure there. I think if we had more support to put the human resources in place to kind of get all of those sharing mechanisms, that industry, government, and we could be having those conversations and not all trying to develop policy separately, but that we could be working in collaboration. And having a bank, I think, is going to be key. And the other big piece is sales. Like, how are these local communities, and getting them linked to buyers that they can sell at a level that's going to bring profitability to not only, say, the big players, but to all of the layers of a community, right down to the harvester that's going to actually be going out and getting the product. So I think that's all in there. Like I said, these are big passions of mine. So I deal with the local people all the time, and there's a big difference, right, between the local and the big industry, and making sure that profitability ripples down to the community.
And I was really happy because we had three very different models here today acting on the community. So I thank you all for taking the time of being here. It was a very, very insightful conversation. I hope to see you guys next year with a bit more, even more impact on the communities you're working with. And now we're going to move to the last session in a few minutes at 9 p.m. I don't care. I'm lost in time, so I'm lost in the time zone. So I'll let you do that part.
You're right, Antoine. It's going to be at 9 p.m. sharp, and we're going to be in Alaska, British Columbia, and we're going to have Mitch, from Maine, talking about, the business model that we should develop in the seaweed industry. And that will conclude, the seaweed around the clock. 1 hour to go. Thank you so much for this very interesting panel, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye,
Thank you. Bye, everyone.